You are listening to yet another episode of Smash the Bug podcast. My name is Joseph Maxwell, and I am super excited to bring to you some of the very best developers in the industry and hear their experiences of how they've smashed hundreds and maybe thousands of bugs. Unfortunately, we don't have time to talk about those thousands of bugs, but we get to hear the learning from squashing thousands of bugs in their career. And I'm super excited to bring to you a very wonderful person, a special guest here. His name is Max Chadwick. He is a tech lead at Rightpoint, but you probably would know the name of the company Something Digital just a little bit better. Rightpoint purchased Something Digital here, was it last year or something? It was fairly recently, and still the same great people and the incredibly good work that those guys do over there, guys and gals at now Rightpoint. So I am super excited to bring him on this podcast and to learn the successes and maybe some of the challenges that he's faced through his career, because ultimately isn't every bug a challenge that we have to work through. But before we do, please make sure that you have clicked that subscribe button on our YouTube channel. We are also on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. So whatever your preferred podcast syndication platform is, make sure you subscribe there because you don't want to miss out on future great content. But without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Max Chadwick from Rightpoint. Welcome, Max. It's great having you on the podcast here today.
Thank you, Joseph. I'm happy to be here.
You are a tech lead, so maybe give us the 30-second overview as far as what does a tech lead do, because I know that kind of varies from company to company.
Yeah, so at Rightpoint, we're structured into small teams, and a team is comprised of a set of developers, and teams are front-end and back-end. I'm a back-end tech lead. Okay. And teams would typically have between maybe 3 to 5 backend developers. And then there would be a project manager type person, or we also have another role that we call strategic engagement manager. And then the team is allocated a QA engineer, designer, another role we call digital strategist, which is more about analytics and things like that. But so that each team also has a tech lead, a back-end and front-end tech lead. The role that I work with is called strategic engagement manager, because we manage ongoing agreements rather than projects, but working close with the strategic engagement manager to review tickets, working with the clients to capture requirements, outlining what the solution will be. We do like to empower developers as well to be able to do that kind of thing, but handling escalations, tickets that are more complicated, and also providing ongoing coaching and feedback to the developers as well. The tech leads also do their performance reviews and provide ongoing performance feedback to them. So that's what the tech lead role looks like at Rightpoint.
Very nice. That sounds interesting. You got a lot on your plate. What stuck out to me, though, as far as all that your role entails for you, though, is the fact that you're kind of that point person for dealing with the most difficult issues. And so that obviously leads us into our conversation here today. And not that, other people not that your other developers don't deal with really challenging issues, but I see over and over again the person in the tech lead role, as you described it, especially focusing on somebody who deals with those most difficult challenges. They have to call it the big boy pants. I mean, there's some difficult challenges, and there's not always somebody who's immediately available. Just like going through your blog, and I need to make sure to call this out here so I do not forget. You have a great blog, Max Chadwick .xyz. So can't forget that it's not .com, it's XYZ. But you basically, and again, I guess I'm leading into our first question here, but you've used this as your personal documentation for some of these most difficult challenges. So not only when you encounter this again, which you're probably bound to encounter those probably on a regular basis now with how many articles you have up there, you encounter it again, but it also serves as a way to inspire other people and to help maybe other people at Rightpoint, just other people on the internet, be able to quickly get those problems solved based off of the documentation that you have pulled together.
Yeah, it's been a great asset that I've developed over the past, I guess, maybe 8 years. I guess it serves all those functions. So, I mean, starting out with just writing the blog posts, for me, it's, it really drills in the knowledge. So, there's a common adage, right, that if you really want to learn something, teach it, right? So by the process of actually, documenting something that came up at work that I learned about, oftentimes I learn more about it by documenting it, because a lot of times when you solve an issue in real time for a client, a real issue that's happening, you solve it, but you don't always fully, like, internally from your own knowledge standpoint, you don't always reach kind of the closure point where you're like, I fully understand everything that I did there. Or, maybe you found something on Stack Exchange or some, a solution somewhere and you implemented it and it worked, but you never really figured out why it worked. So that would be the first kind of thing that I've gotten out of it, is just really helped me become more knowledgeable about things. But then, yeah, I mean, it oftentimes, like, I'll see the same issue and I'll go back and say, hey, here's a blog post that I wrote about this issue, and I'll refer my team to it with different strategies or issues that we've dealt with in the past. So it's become a resource for that as well. And like you said, I mean, yes, I get tens of thousands of visitors, so it's helping a lot of other people too.
That is so cool. I love that, and it's that idea of the 1% improvement every day, and it really adds up. And you're not only improving yourself, your skills. I would think it's fairly safe to say that you are probably one of the most skilled people in the Magento space, and that's, I think, a lot of that due to the fact that you have had that ongoing discipline of maintaining or growing and sharing your knowledge through the course of time. And so I think it's a powerful testament to your willingness to invest in self-improvement.
Thank you. That's quite the compliment.
No, and it's I believe it's well founded based off of what I've seen from you. So it definitely is not flattery. So the question I'd like to dive into is, let's ground this with some bugs, right? So we've talked about some great practical things, and it might not be the takeaway from this might not be everyone go start your own blog, but documenting this, the challenges that you faced, make sure to document those, whether it's just in GIS on GitHub, a Google Doc, a text file, wherever it is, wherever the medium is, it's important to be documenting this stuff. And so that's critical. So kind of along those lines is your blog post about keeping notes while debugging. It's a ridiculously practical post that you pulled together, and it kind of goes through what I believe to be, at least to your methodology as far as how you work through a debugging session. And I'm guessing this is one of those, like, really deep ones, like a why are you getting this wonky total that's being authorized on a payment card, or something that's going to take quite a bit to get to the root of that. Kind of walk us through this, your process here, and how you find it to be helpful, and I guess the benefits that you see from this.
Okay, so there's multiple aspects of it. I mean, in my opinion, and I think in a lot of people, I think a lot of people would agree with this, is that debugging can kind of feel like a bottomless pit.
Yeah.
At some times. And you could just feel like you're just throwing stuff at the wall, right? And, I tried this. Did it work? No, it didn't work, right? And you're just trying stuff over and over, right? And maybe, honestly, maybe you're doing the same thing, Like you tried the same thing. You already tried it once before, but you try it again because maybe it's going to work this time, right? So to me, one aspect of it is just like being systematic in how you're going about things. So my blog post just it talks about, generally speaking, the value of keeping notes, because when you write down what you do, you it's like you keep track of like each individual thing. Okay, here I tested this, and this is what happened, and then you test another thing, write it down, what happened, right? So it's almost like you're doing like an experiment, like if you were a scientist, right? Like you would make some change, observe some result, and write it down, right? So I really think that, like, from a process standpoint, it helps you organize it. Also, going back to the escalation aspect that we talked about, if you're a developer and let's say you've been working on a bug for 8 hours, and you're stuck on it, you don't know what to do next, right? And then you come to your tech lead and say, I've been working on this bug for 8 hours. Okay, what have you done so far, right? If you didn't keep those notes, could you really recount well how you spent those 8 hours? I don't think so. So having this kind of paper trail of what was done in that time is super helpful for escalation or handoff. We have bugs that, they you don't wrap them up in a day, right? Like somebody spent a day on it, you have to report back to the client. Okay, here's what we got. Here's the next step that we outlined. Maybe somebody goes on PTO after that, and somebody else needs to pick it up. So they need a record. Like at one point, I don't know if we have time tracking system, and if you let's say you looked at the time tracking entry and you saw an 8-hour time entry and it said troubleshoot issue, right? And the issue wasn't resolved. Somebody spent 8 hours on it. What was actually delivered in that 8 hours? Nothing real. I mean, something was delivered to their brain, I guess, but like not in the end, like nothing was really even done at that time. So it's also about like producing a deliverable as part of the debugging.
I love that.
So I think there's tons of benefits and reasons for why you would be doing this keeping notes, and that's all kind of outlined in that blog post.
Yes, and for all of our listeners' benefit, just search for Max Chadwick keeping notes while debugging. The title couldn't be simpler. It's keeping notes while debugging, and that pulls up this article, which is really it's just common sense, good ideas in here, but it couldn't be stated any better. So it's so good. So yeah, let's talk about some of the scenarios in which you've used this, because we see the benefits, and this is valuable to be used whether it's the smallest, easiest bug to fix or the most difficult bug to fix. I guess you could say that if it was just a one-liner, I don't know, but it's still valuable practice to implement regardless of how big it is, because ultimately otherwise we'd start falling out of the practice. Walk me through maybe an example of like a really difficult bug that you solved recently, and then in how this helped you solve it faster and avoid repeating the same attempted solutions, which ultimately would help you get to the end destination faster.
Yeah. So there's actually like a section about using spreadsheets as well. Because a lot of times the type of bugs we have are like I call them cases. So it's like like this thing has happened, at some point, and we have a set of examples of times where this has happened, and you know what happened, but you don't know what caused it to happen. So I think one that's easy to grasp, and I think for Magento developers, if you've been doing Magento development long enough, you have dealt with this issue, is that you have an order and there's a record of it in your payment gateway, but there's no record of that order in Magento.
Yes.
So the client emails you a list of orders and says, hey, we have no record of these in Magento, but we captured payment for them. And so for that, like, you have this list of orders, and oh, there could be so many things that caused it, right? So where do I look?
Hmm.
I don't know. You're probably looking at logs. There's a lot of logs to check. You're probably looking at all the Magento logs. You might, maybe you're looking at error logs and things like that. So what I'd like to do in this type of a situation is create a spreadsheet of each case where this has happened. So you can imagine there's different columns, and there's a row for each case. So you have a column order number, and then maybe like the time that it happened.
Yes.
And then usually what I'll do is like each log file that you checked, you would include like any interesting results from each log file. So okay, here's what I found in system.log. When this happened. Here's what I found in exception.log. Here's what I found in error.log, right? This has happened so many times, but the most recent one where it happened, the issue actually didn't wind up being that complicated. It was actually pretty simple, but there was basically a fatal error
Nice.
in a third-party module, when the order was being placed, and it was failing in such a way that when it failed, the order had been sent it to the payment gateway, and because it was a fatal error, the execution just terminates at that point, and it doesn't like roll it back in authorize.net. But so just like capture, having this system where you go through all the cases, checking all the logs and documenting them each, because there were actually cases where that didn't happen, and the order was still missing, but you can get like statistics that way too. Like, okay, you reported us 10 cases of this, and or you reported us 100 cases. We spot checked 10, and 8 out of 10 had this error. So like there are multiple things that could be causing this, but let's focus on the one where this happened 8 out of 10 times.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
So using that kind of system, which is really a documentation based, you can share that document of all the cases that you investigated. Anybody could look at it and see your findings, is helpful. And so I encourage people a lot to use that type of a system for debugging, to like kind of record instances or cases of where something has happened, and compiling kind of a spreadsheet of all the details around each of those cases. So it could also be like access logs, like information about the quote, maybe. Like sometimes we've seen patterns where some quote items cause this issue. We actually saw the same issue, and what it was caused by was, this is on another client, but it was caused by Unicode characters in the product name.
Wow.
And what was actually failing was it had to JSON encode the quote items,
Yes.
and the JSON encode was failing because of the Unicode characters, and it was winding up sending a 0-byte message to authorize.net. And so in that case, it's like a pattern recognition thing. Like the pattern is a similar quote items. Like they all have the same item in the quote every time, right? So how do you find something that's in common with all these cases?
And so basically, the spreadsheet in this case is helpful to visualize the data. So you see, okay, maybe we have these orders. What's common between these orders? Oh, we have actually the same here. So then it's like, so why is this JSON breaking? And then like I dealt with that. If you have, like, for example, different environments and different encryption keys, and same concept, and you get weird reCAPTCHA decryption, and it's like, why the heck is my JSON encode breaking? And you start whittling it back, and you eventually find out, oh yeah, it's those reCAPTCHA keys that didn't get decoded, get decrypted correctly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Exactly. That's just it. Yeah, it's a way for tracking it, a system you can put in place, and I find it to be very effective to identify what, like, root cause, basically.
That's great. As opposed to, again, the alternative that I think so many of us developers fall back to is just like, okay, well, I got this list of order numbers and that the client sent me, and it's like, okay, well, how does this work together? And so we're saying we go look at one order, then the next order, and we're trying to piece these together. But the spreadsheet, again, allows you to visualize this information. And it could be detailed or maybe a little less detailed, but ultimately it's there in front of you. You can take notes, and it provides the documentation. So your brain is, well, I guess ultimately that's the whole idea of documentation, even personally, is that your brain is not overloaded. You're not in trying to store all these facts and make these connections. Right. You visually see these facts and connections, and it's been a definitely light bulb moment for me a number of times. It's like, oh, wow, visualizing the data, wow. And one was, we talked about this in a recent podcast, it's like, wow, that was so stupid. Why didn't I come across that earlier? But actually just seeing it in front of me made all the difference in the world. Talk about N98 Mage Run. Or actually Mage Run 2 now, I guess. But so you're a fan of this, and I fully agree. It's great. But we have yet to have somebody on the podcast that talks about this, and so I'm really excited to hear what's your favorite use cases for that, and how you use that in your debugging strategies.
Okay, so with the DevConsole, this can be really useful for debugging production. So I wind up dealing with a lot of production issues, and you don't have the same issues that won't replicate in any other environment. And so you don't have the same luxuries that you have in your local environment. Like, it's not trivial to turn on Xdebug in production. I don't know if you guys do it at SwiftOtter, but it's not something we do at Rightpoint / something digital. So we need to figure out ways that we can troubleshoot something that's happening in production in the least some way that essentially does not interrupt what's actually happening. So N98 Mage Run 2 has this DevConsole. And what it allows you to do is you initialize the DevConsole, and you're in like a REPL shell. So you have access to Magento is bootstrapped. You have access to the object manager as this. It's a DI variable, so you can call DI get and then the class that you want. And what it allows you to basically do is, like, let's say that you like, I mean, another issue that we could talk about is I don't see the products that I expect on this page. And so
there's a lot of variables that go into that.
Right. So you know that, okay, so like there's the layer class that, loads the product collection, right? Like you know the different functions that are called and involved in render, fetching the product collection that's going to be displayed to the user. And you basically want to run the code that's running in production and observe what's happening. So what you can use the DevConsole for is like, okay, so I know that this function is called on this class. Let me load that object, call that function, and observe the output, right?
That's so cool.
So I got the output of the product collection, and yes, it's, as I can see in that product collection, I can see, it's the same missing products as what I saw. Okay, so let me go look into that function and see what functions it calls, and then you kind of drill down from there until you get to like which function was the call. So there can be issues with it, like, if it doesn't run exactly the same, so maybe there's some observer that doesn't get called or something like that. And then another common one is like you need to call a private method, right? On a class, and that's then you have to like, let me reconstruct the private method so I can just make it into public. But it is a useful tool for like observing, like I said, basically observing the result of different function calls, and you can call them the same way, like, as if you were setting a breakpoint or adding a logger statement and getting the output. But you can do it without actually interrupting the real execution of the application in production.
That is so cool. I'd never heard of that as a feature of N98 Mage Run 2. So using the DevConsole is how you unlock this Pandora's box of ability to troubleshoot stuff in production.
Yes.
That is so cool. I love that.
Wow. Yeah, and there you can also use a similar concept just by like creating your own test scripts. So you don't necessarily need to use the DevConsole. You can create a script if you Google it and just Google like how to bootstrap Magento. You'll find you basically have to load a certain class and launch the application, and then you can get the object manager, and you can do essentially the same thing. But it's a little, then you can like create a little script file rather than being in, and sometimes it's easier to edit a script file. So that's another way you can do it, and another technique I use often to understand like what's happening in production.
Now, but you bring up an interesting point, and that is Magento Cloud is read-only, right?
Yeah.
So it seems like, are you, unless I'm missing something, there's really wouldn't be a way, unless I guess you drop in with the pub the var directory. Got it. That's right. That's a good point. Yeah. So you drop your editable file there, or use the DevConsole. Either way will get you to a live environment and being able to run some commands in production, see what's going on there.
Yeah. You can use var, and for DevConsole you actually also have to tell it to use var for its home directory, because it does allow you to do like the scroll back thing. So it keeps track of like what commands you've run in the past. So it needs to be able to write it somewhere. So you need to tell it to do that into var.
Nice. That's a great, and that was one of your suggestions here. So that's the using N98 Mage Run to DevConsole on Magento Cloud blog article. So that's a great suggestion. Thank you. That's good. I think we might, I'll ask you the final question here, and definitely be giving you an invitation for coming back on to continue this conversation. I feel like there's a lot more to unpack, and you have a tremendous amount of experience. What would you say, and maybe somebody answered this, but I'll still ask it. What are you doing to improve your skills, your growth? Like, do you have any habits that you work to constantly be facilitating your ongoing growth? Your favorite tools? I kind of also fit into that same thing.
Yeah, I mean, so maintaining my blog, which I'm actually a little behind on it recently, so I need to do more on that. But I mean, in terms of like growing and learning, I spend a lot of time on that. Another thing which is not related to debugging so much, but I'm also very passionate about security. Mm-hmm. And so I've actually spent a lot of time doing research and finding security issues in the Magento code base through the bug bounty program.
Good for you.
And actually, you learn a ton from that too, because when you're searching for security issues, you wind up spending a lot of time like figuring out how something works. Mm-hmm. So that's another thing that I have done historically that's really helped me learn on an ongoing basis about Magento. Plus, there's an incentive, obviously, with the bounty aspect of the bug bounty as well.
And way better than you than the bad guys doing it, right? I mean, because you'll get it reported, it'll get fixed, and then it'll prevent, again, the bad guys from exploiting that same thing. And it's very interesting, like you say, they getting in there, looking at the security vulnerabilities in the system. You learned this system inside and out, and so none of that. So let me put it from a different perspective. You get value from both directions. Not only are you helping solve a problem, but you are also learning more about how this system works, or at least reiterating how it works into your mind, which ultimately provides more value to Rightpoint as you work on debugging, solving problems through the course of time. So that's really good. Wow. This has been good, Max, and I appreciate you coming on here to share your knowledge, your wisdom, your insight as far as how you've tackled some difficult issues. And I think that our conversation earlier, as I'm thinking back to it, about how you troubleshot these orders being missing from Magento that are on the payment gateway, or even not even hitting the payment gateway. But, those are probably some of the most difficult orders, or the most dreaded problems to solve, because they're usually random. I mean, if the whole site's down, that's bad, but usually it's a lot easier to find the problem there usually. But when it's those random, this thing is missing, boy, that is some of the most complex issues. And yet your strategy for how you approach those is incredibly valuable. And I know many people will take value and benefit from that. So thank you for sharing your insights there.
You're welcome. Thanks so much for having me, Joseph.
It was an absolute pleasure, and I'll look forward to it. Just so you know, we got another invitation. We'll get you scheduled again. So
I would love it. Yeah, I have a lot of bugs to talk about.
I bet you do, and we'll talk about them. So anyways, it was great having you on, Max. Thank you for joining Smash the Bug.
Thanks for having me.
Wow, that was a absolutely terrific conversation there. I come away, it's like, wow, Max knows what he's talking about, and I really do believe he is one of the best, very best Magento developers worldwide. He's tackled so many problems, and remember, it's not necessarily, he did not get those problems thrown at him, I believe, just to throw at him. He's been working, he said, for 8 years on this blog. He's slowly built up this repertoire to be able to solve these problems fast. I bet he can solve a ton of problems really, really quickly, if for no other reason than his personal solutions list. So maybe I can challenge you today to start this list. It doesn't take that long to build if you're just don't want to take much time. It doesn't take much time to get started, but it doesn't have to be full-blown blog posts. At least just get started. Write something. Use your gist, the gist in GitHub. Start somewhere, and you will be grateful for that investment. Again, 8 years is a lot of blog posts, a lot of material that has been written, and it's constantly giving back in value. That one post that we talked about, the keeping notes while debugging, it was written in 2016, and we still take great value from it today. So take that as a challenge, my friends, as you listen to this blog post. So again, thank you for tuning in to Smash the Bug. It's a pleasure to have you on here today. I hope that you are subscribed on whatever channels that were available. I said that at the beginning. You can rewind if you want to hear those again. But it was a pleasure having you here, and look forward to our next episode coming soon.